Welcome once again to the Conversations That Matter podcast. We are live now and looking at people now starting to come into the chat. And as we go, I'm sure more and more people will come in. Questions, comments, you can leave them on Facebook or YouTube in the chat section. If you are a patron, you can go to patreon.com/worldview conversation. That's patreon.com/worldview conversation. You can be part of the program. I'm going to open it up later in case there's anyone who wants to, by video or by audio, share a thought or ask a question. So we're going to be talking about two primary issues, and that's why I've labeled the video today the way I have. We're going to be talking about the anti-Israel protests on college campuses and the Arizona anti-abortion law that's been on the books apparently since, they always say Civil War era. So that's supposed to make it sound so old that it can't possibly be right. But it's been on the books for a while. And of course, Roe v. Wade I suppose you could say overruled. Maybe that wasn't a legal thing necessarily, but that's the way that people operated. And now that the Dobbs decision has been handed down, there's a debate in Arizona over this particular restriction. So we're going to talk about that a little bit and whatever else anyone has. So I want to get started today with just a quick announcement and an update. The announcement I'll start with, and then we'll do the update. The announcement is that this weekend I'm going to be outside of Minneapolis in Wisconsin, actually, in St. Croix Falls. Beautiful area, by the way. The Midwest is it has a beauty to it. And I think most people who travel on freeways probably think that it's just cornfields or wheat fields. And of course, there are a lot of corn and wheat fields, but one of the things that I found, especially in traveling to Wisconsin, is there actually is some topographical diversity. And there's some interesting places with geological formations. And of course, in northern Wisconsin, you have the Northwoods. And this is kind of a cool area. It's got a lot of pine trees. There's a lot of hardwoods that in the fall turn colors. And they have, of course, they have their cheese factories too. I'm just saying, there's more to it than many people who live outside of the Midwest think. And traveling to a place, I know of one person who's traveling from Georgia to come to this conference, traveling from a place like Georgia to Wisconsin. You may not think that you're going to encounter many surprising things, but there are. And I'm actually looking forward to going back there. So, and that's just the region. But of course, the conference, I probably should talk about that, right? The conference is going to be very interesting. We have Pastor Seth Brickley, who's hosting it. He's the pastor of Eureka Baptist Church. We have David Wheaton, the Christian Worldview radio program. I was on his show 2 weeks ago to talk about this. Of course, I'll be there. Dr. Russell Fuller will be there, and Jeff Cleaver will also be there, pastor of Cornerstone Church. I've had him on the podcast, and Dr. Russell Fuller has been on the podcast a few times. There is a number of things I believe we're talking about. I mean, the theme is to be not conformed, but I know the sessions that I'm doing are going to have probably more to do with the liberal order than they do actual wokeness. And so, if you don't know what that is, that's more reason to come. Well, what am I talking about? I'm going to start to critique the liberal order probably more than I have even on this podcast, starting with this conference. And it'll be beneficial. I'll also talk about the responses to quote unquote wokeness, and some that were inadequate, some that were good, and what can we learn from those responses. So that will be this weekend in St. Croix Falls, Wisconsin. You can go to truthscript.com/conference if you want to find out more about this. And I think that's about it. Now, the update I was just going to share with you is thank you for all those who support me and prayed for me over the weekend. I was out in Idaho and Boise. I had a wonderful time. The Steinmeier family who hosted me is just a wonderful family. Pastor Danny Steinmeier is the pastor of the church there. We talked about this idea of being strong in the Lord, spiritual warfare, and how this relates to some of the ideas of our age, the ideologies, and also more than just political threats. Matt Slick was there. He's an apologist in that area. And carm.org, many of you have probably heard of that. He talked about different cults and how they challenge Christianity. It's just a wonderful time. And so I just want to thank everyone who came out to that. I got to meet some of you there, and just a great, great time. And I know they're planning on doing this every year. So if you're looking for a good church, and I know many people are fleeing California and other places, you might want to check out Truth Family Bible Church outside of Boise. So there's my little plug for that. And someone just said in the chat, the weather's lovely right now in Northeast Indiana. You know, it's really great in upstate New York right now too. I was just outside, and if it wasn't for the fact that I think this is very important, what I'm going to talk about, I'd probably still be out there. So tomorrow, hopefully I'll get to go out with my wife, have a little picnic maybe before I get on the plane again and go out to St. Croix. All right. With all that said, I want to start with a video, a little montage that I made to introduce this subject of the anti-Israeli protests or anti-Israel protests happening on college campuses. And I might stop during this. It's only like a 3-minute, 4-minute little montage, but here it is.
Of the anti-Semitic president of the University of Columbia. It is time to end the pro-terrorist occupation of this university.
So I'm just going to say real quick that what you just saw, that was Sean Foyt, who's a Christian music artist. You saw at the end there, Eric Metaxas was behind him, whispering something in his ear. That was a protest, I think, maybe 5 days ago, something like that. It was earlier in the week, and or maybe it was the end of last weekend. But they were counter protesting essentially, and they're calling for the resignation of Columbia University's president. So that's what that was.
Circle blockade around these three. We're gonna move them out. Let's go.
Another human chain.
United. Get someone wrap around. Get inside the ring. Back up.
All right. So then what you just saw was Rory Wilson and a friend of his, that's Doug Wilson's grandson. I suppose that's the significance there. He made mainstream news though by making himself out to be a barrier along with his friend in front of Hamilton Hall at the Columbia University, where pro-Palestinian protesters were trying to get in. This was 2 nights ago.
Back up! Get back! Get back! Get arrested! Get back or get arrested!
Okay, so what you're seeing now are scenes from the police who went into, I believe they went into Hamilton Hall, but they went into Columbia University last night. I was actually watching the coverage on both CNN and Fox. I was at the gym, and I just turned on both on the little elliptical thing just to see how they were covering it. And of course, it was a little different the way that they were covering it, but you got to see the police climbing in the windows, and I believe it was in Hamilton Hall, and then making some of these arrests. So that's what you're seeing here is they made some arrests, or at least they detained some individuals, put them in these police buses. The thing is, though, New York City has a bail law. They've essentially gotten rid of bail. So all that's probably going to happen, unless there are quote unquote hate crimes charges, that on Fox News, they had a guest suggesting that that's what should be done with every one of these protesters. They are going to end up being set free. So the consequences aren't really that great. And perhaps that incentivizes people to do this kind of thing at Columbia.
It is especially important that we remember the power of young people shaping this country today, of all days, as we once again witness the leadership of those peaceful student-led protests on campuses like Columbia, Yale, Berkeley, and many others.
Now that's AOC, and she represents a district in New York City. So very close. I don't think Columbia University is in her district. If I'm not, I don't remember exactly where she is, but close by. And she, of course, is one of the leading progressive voices in the Democratic Party today. And that's what she had to say about these particular protests. And this was, I should let you know the sequence of this. This was a few days ago when AOC said this. So it was before what happened last night, but she was standing in solidarity with the protesters on these various campuses.
Please leave, grab your stuff, go home. If not, you're going to get suspended. And that was the right decision. and they do need to suspend these kids if they're not willing to leave, and then get them off campus, and they can protest, off this piece of private property, so that everyone else, and it's the vast majority of students at Columbia and across the country who just want to go to class.
Several.
So, and I can't remember the name of that congressman. I wish I could. He's from Ohio, though, but he's a Democrat. And he is taking the opposite side here in a sense. And you could see that he's trying to handle it with kid gloves, but he's saying that the protesters should leave so that they can let people go to class.
Students were arrested. As the unrest upends education in America, questions are swirling about how to contain the growing protests.
And Governor Abbott releasing his own statement about the protests on social media yesterday, sharing a stern message to demonstrators. His post from yesterday afternoon says, quote, "Arrests are being made right now and will continue until the crowd disperses. These protesters belong in jail. Anti-Semitism will not be tolerated in Texas, period. Students joining in hate-filled anti-Semitic protests at any public college or university in Texas should be expelled," end quote.
So this was Governor Greg Abbott. And the reason I put him in here, I know he's not directly related to Columbia, but this is obviously way bigger than Columbia. Columbia is just the university that was making headlines last night. Greg Abbott, of course, has taken very strong stance in Texas against anti-Semitism, quote unquote. He's also taken a very strong, aggressive stance against the protests that are against Israel. And I think it might be, maybe I should wait to talk about this. I'll just say it now, though. I think it's important to realize at the outset that many of these protesters on these campuses, if you were to say that they were anti-Semitic, they would look at you funny. They don't view themselves that way. In fact, they would probably be the first ones to call you anti-Semitic as a conservative Christian. They are anti-Israel. That's how they view themselves. And many Jewish students are also protesting. And I don't know how many. I was looking to see if there were any studies done on this. I couldn't find any. There are many examples on social media, though, where Jewish students and others who are Jewish have made videos of themselves protesting and saying they stand in solidarity with the Palestinians and that kind of thing against Israel. So Israel is really the target of these protests. But anyway, that being said, I wanted to show Greg Abbott because he's been probably one of the more vocal Republicans against these protests. And that's what he said in relation to these protests. But I wanted to do a little flashback with Greg Abbott. This is what Greg Abbott said right when the BLM protests were starting.
Let's be clear. What happened to George Floyd is a horrific act of police brutality. People are rightfully angry. But the beautiful thing about America is that every person has the right to make their voices heard, to protest against this injustice.
So, some very different sounding narratives coming from Governor Greg Abbott. And I'm not the first to point this out. I know I saw it on Twitter, formerly Twitter. See, I'm still calling it Twitter, X. I saw that R.N. McIntyre a few days ago had pointed out, he showed a video, I did not show it here, of police at a Texas university being very aggressive. And he said, look, the BLM protests could have been stopped anytime these people wanted them to, but they didn't handle them with the aggression that they should have or they could have. And you see now, though, that there are Republican governors who really are very aggressive against what they think of as anti-Semitism, these anti-Israel protests on college campuses. So that should probably trouble you a little bit, to even if you agree with Governor Greg Abbott and the stance he took. Why is it that he's motivated on an issue like this, but in 2020 the motivation was not there as much? What's the problem? Why not? And it's not just Governor Greg Abbott. I probably could have put a number of different Republican governors up on the screen, but I wanted to use him just because I think he has been extra vocal about this. And with the time I have, I thought if I'm going to pick one, he's the one that I want to talk about. Now, this is Governor Greg Abbott, in contrast to the Democrats I showed you. And this is one of the big points I want to make. There is a civil war happening right now in the Democratic Party. In fact, there's stories about it on social media right now. You have this story from CNN. and this is a recent story. It says this: college campus protests highlight tensions in Biden's coalition. Now, any other year, tensions in Biden's coalition, maybe that wouldn't make a big difference to you, but this is 2024 and we have an election coming up, and more than one election. And if there are tensions in the Democrat primary, or sorry, not primary, in the general election, if there are tensions in the Democratic Party, then this could actually play favorably for opposing parties, namely the Republicans. And of course, this gets into why that is, but it's really just what I showed you. It's, you have two wings of the Democratic Party. You have kind of the party, the older individuals in the party, generally speaking, who represent the old guard. They would be more pro-Israel. And then you have the younger voices who are the vanguard, some call them, but they are much more inclined towards a radical social justice, and they look at Israel as a colonizer state of the West, and they look at the Palestinians as brown people who have been subjugated. And so you do the intersectional math on this, and it looks like Israel is the white oppressor. And so that's how they look at it. And so that's what's motivating them. And this is splitting the party up. And it means that the Democratic National Convention this year may very well have a lot of tension. And it's not the first time a Democrat National Convention would have tension over social issues, but it could be significant enough to perhaps even help the Republicans. And I think a lot of the Republicans probably know this, and it might be one of the reasons that they're so motivated to act, because the majority of Americans do support Israel. Now, that support has waned over time, but there's an opportunity here for Republicans to secure both votes, perhaps, and money. Let's face it, there's a demographic that feels under threat, that has more than the rest of the population per capita. They have more money. And so I think Republicans look at this and they see an opportunity and they're seizing it. So I know most of my analysis has been political. I am going to give you some Bible, though, just so you know. We're coming up on it, but I want to set the stage for everything that I think we need to talk about here. Fox News is reporting that anti-Israel protests nationwide are fueled by left-wing groups backed by Soros money. And of course, Soros is Jewish. I just think it is important to emphasize that this is more of an anti-Israel thing than it is an anti-Semitic or anti-Jewish. It's against a particular nation state. And that's what's motivating this. I know that so many people want to reframe this, and they want to make it about Jewish people on campuses. I've seen Christians doing this. I've seen conservatives doing this, that if any Jewish person gets hurt, I know there was someone in California, there was a student, I haven't been able to verify it, but apparently a Jewish student who was beaten. And I'm having a hard time, though, telling the difference between Jewish and pro-Israeli. In fact, even in that clip I showed you of those two students at Columbia blocking Hamilton Hall, at least one of them was not Jewish. They were in their ethnicity. The other one, maybe they had the little, I don't know, but they're not coming from a Jewish community. The other one I don't think was either, but the headlines were Jewish protesters, and we're getting things are being conflated here. So I think it's important to keep those things straight, just so we know exactly what the issues are. Because if we get the issue wrong, if we just see this as these are a bunch of Nazis which is the way that the right frames this, many of the establishment right people are framing it. It's Nazis who want to, who just have like a racial problem with Jews. That's a mischaracterization. At least that's not what the left-wing protesters, by and large, think that they're out there for. There was a poll that I pulled up from late last year from the Wall Street Journal. And in this particular poll, it says 55% of those polled said they believe Israel is taking the military action needed to defend itself and prevent another attack by Hamas. 25% said Israel's military action is disproportionate and going too far. So, like I said, it's popular in the country as a whole to be pro-Israel. In terms of attitude towards the conflict, some 42% of voters said they sympathize more with the Israeli people compared to 12% who said the same of the Palestinian people. I'm sure that is changing. I'm sure that more people are probably going to the Palestinian side over time, as pictures and video come out of decimated areas in Gaza and that kind of thing. But when was this? This was Doesn't say. I know it was the end of last year. I think when I put it in reader mode, let me see if I can pick it back up here. No. It was the end of last year, though. I can't remember exactly when. President Biden, it says, received low marks for his response to the war, with 37% of those polled saying they approved of his handling, 52% disapproved. And then nearly a quarter of Democrats said they were more sympathetic to Palestinians, compared with 17% who said they sympathize more with Israeli people. So you have more people on the Democrat side sympathizing with the Palestinians. Just under half said they were equally sympathetic to both. By contrast, more than 2/3 of Republicans said they were sympathetic to Israelis, compared to 22% who sympathize more with Palestinians and 17% who said they sympathize with both groups. So why am I bringing this up? Well, it's to say this: the people on the Republican side really have hardly anything, if anything, to lose by sympathizing with Israel, and they have much to lose if they don't. Right? The Democrats, though, are in the middle of a tug of war on this. More people seem to sympathize with the Palestinians, but there's a sizable amount of people who sympathize with the Israelis. So what are they to do? And this is where Aaron Wren had said yesterday on X that if your enemy has a problem, if they're fighting amongst themselves, don't solve it for them. Don't solve their problem. And I know Doug Wilson pushed back on this somewhat, and there's been a lot of talk online. I'm not going to get into all of it, but there's been a lot of back and forth on what should conservatives and what should Christians do about this. We're called to love our neighbor. Shouldn't that mean that if we have it in our power to stand against protesters at a place like Hamilton Hall, we should do it? And the first thing I would say about it is I think anything I say should start this way. Those who did stand up at Hamilton Hall 2 nights ago and will perhaps stand up in the future on these college campuses as we see these protests going on, many of them are to be commended, because it takes a tremendous amount of bravery. And, I've never been in quite a situation. Well, actually, now that I think of it, I kind of was in one that was even more scary in some ways, but because I was at January 6th. And I remember being in the lawn I've told the story before. So I was in the lawn of the Capitol, and I was told that we could be there by someone who was there. I asked, are we allowed to be here? And then, of course, out of nowhere, there's tear gas and all. So I remember that. And this is different than that, though. This is, you are the one that's standing in a position, and you have people coming against you, wanting to get through you. And there's a whole sizable crowd. And so I've never quite been in that position. I did attend a protest against Silent Sam, which was a Confederate soldier monument in North Carolina. And that was on a college campus, UNC. And I did go there, and I gave out Gatorade to those who were protesting it. And then I talked to them, and I debated them for like 3 hours. And I mean, it was great. We had professors coming out. I've written about it before. But it wasn't a violent protest, at least at that time. If it was, I probably still would have gone. I just would have been careful. But I saw it as a witnessing opportunity. I also saw it as an opportunity for these people to be challenged in their own thinking on this issue. And so I've never quite had to face down exactly what they were facing down. And I think the little taste I've had of it, I do believe it does take some bravery. You are up against the mob. You are up against the machine in some ways. I mean, when you get enough people, they don't behave like normal people do. We call it the mob mentality, and violence is possible. So I want to say that off the top. As a matter of prudence, though, on a very macro level, looking at this whole thing and all the college campuses, looking at the reactions of governors, looking at those who are students, who are conservatives, even on these campuses, the whole thing, I think we ought to be cautious about involving ourselves too much in these things. And I have a very simple reason for that. Let me show you, and this is just one example. This could be representative of probably any of these colleges, but let me just show you what Hamilton Hall is about. So Hamilton Hall was 2 nights ago. This was the building that was defended, or there were Christian conservatives trying to prevent some students from going in there, and very commendable. Again, I need to say that. But this is Hamilton Hall. This hall was inaugurated in 1907 as a flagship building and still houses the dean's office. Okay, so the dean's office is there, the source of much of the problem. This is a great day for the college. And so they talk about when it was commemorated. But then it says that, let's see, Hamilton Hall, Hamilton is depicted as an abolitionist. However, some research says, okay, that's not what I wanted. What do they teach there? Okay, this was it. Okay. The story got broken up for some reason, I think because I put it in reader mode. They teach U.S. politics, Canada's multiculturalism, South America's geopolitical rise. Oh no, I'm sorry, my bad. Let me take that back. I think that's let me just actually get out of reader mode. I thought it would help me being in reader mode, but apparently not. Let's see if I can go down to Hamilton Hall here. Okay. It talks about the history of different protests there. Okay, so there's 4 department offices in Hamilton Hall. There's Germanic languages, Slavic languages, classics, and Italian language. It houses the center. Now, here's what I wanted to emphasize. It houses the Center for Race and Ethnicity. So Columbia University, very left university. Their Center for Race and Ethnicity, it's in Hamilton Hall, where these conservatives were preventing protesters from going in and possibly messing things up. A renovation that began in 2000 brought about a new center for the core curriculum. So what else do they have there? Literature, humanities, contemporary civilization, music humanities, art humanities, and major cultures departments. So many of the very departments who are cranking out critical race theory would be located in Hamilton Hall. This is where students are getting their indoctrination, is in Hamilton Hall. Now, it's probably in all the buildings, but Hamilton Hall holds a special place, being the center of race and ethnicity. So, and the dean's office. So this is the building that they were protecting. Now, that being said, I think it's important these are some of the scriptures that I'm considering, because I saw someone this morning bring up the scripture, bring up Old Testament passage. I think it was a particular passage, if not passages, where you see a principle of helping your neighbor, right? Helping them if he's got a problem with his ox, help him, that kind of thing. And that this is what you're doing. You're standing for the rule of law. You're standing against the mob. You're standing in favor of helping your neighbor. And helping your neighbor means helping, I guess, your liberal neighbor as well. Now, this is where I make a distinction. And I want people out there who are listening to this podcast to understand why I take a different approach on this, because I took a very public, different approach on X. And I caught myself. I didn't realize I would be in this, but apparently I was in the center of a controversy over this a little bit. And there were guys, not surprisingly, Stephen Wolfe, I think even William Wolfe, were saying things that kind of seemed like they agreed with what I was saying, or maybe they thought I was saying things that agreed with them. But we were saying some of the same things. Andrew, like I said before, Aaron McIntyre was saying similar things. So was I can't remember now. There was some others, but then you had people who were saying, no, that's not right at all. Conservatives should essentially insert themselves into these conflicts because it's more or less about loving neighbor. So here's why I say what I do. And I want to give you some scripture to think about along with this. I see this as more than just an interpersonal type of situation. Now, obviously, and this would be the difference. If there is someone, let's say, a liberal professor, and the mob wants to go take his life, and you stand in front of that mob, that would be an interpersonal situation. If your neighborhood had a mob coming and they want to burn your neighbor's house down, that would be more of an interpersonal situation, I suppose. The way I categorize this is more of a political / public situation, and it's closer to a wartime setting. I think that the United States is in more than an ideological war. It is an ideological war, but it's also an institutional war. It's a culture war, and it's perhaps a Cold War with some flare-ups now and then, but it is still a war. There are friends and there are enemies in this conflict. And an institution like Columbia University, and specifically a building like Hamilton Hall, and you could extrapolate this to any of the universities that are having the same trouble, those institutions are really the center of the enemy's base. That's where the enemy lives. That's where the enemy promotes his ideology. That's where the enemy tries to destroy Christianity from within the halls of power. That's where the enemy is set up. And because of that, I look at these institutions as more than interpersonal. And I think that the ethics of war starts to apply at a certain point. And so what are some verses that I'm thinking of? This is beyond just loving your neighbor or loving your enemy, right? Even loving your enemy, giving him your coat, or I think we all know that doesn't apply in a wartime setting. That applies to interpersonal relationships, right? That's what I'm talking about. Let me give you some principles. Proverbs 26:17 says, like one who takes a dog by the ears is he who passes by and meddles with strife not belonging to him. Now, this is a general principle. This could apply to interpersonal, but it could also apply to political fights. If you aren't the one, if this isn't your fight, then you are taking a dog by the ears, and you're meddling with strife that does not belong to you. And the question you have to ask is, do you have a dog in this fight? Is this strife that belongs to you? Now, some might say yes, of course, because I'm pro-Israel. Now, I don't know how you help Israel exactly being on a college campus, but the immediate threat right there is not to Israel. The immediate threat is to the university. It's to the college campus. It's to undermining their authority. In effect, these protesters are preventing learning from happening, or indoctrination, if you want to call it that, from happening, which is something we should probably be happy about in some ways. I mean, less indoctrination is happening right now because the universities are in an uproar. And so you have two enemies against each other. You have a civil war in the Democratic Party, and this is how I view it. I don't think it's strife that belongs to me. This is, my enemies are fighting. Now, there's some firm examples of this in Scripture. You see 2 Chronicles 20:17 and 20:22 through 23 says this: "You need not fight in this battle. Station yourselves, stand and see the salvation of the Lord on your behalf. O Judah and Jerusalem, do not fear nor be dismayed. Tomorrow go out to face them, for the Lord is with you." When they began singing, when Jerusalem, the Judah began singing, it says, and praising the Lord set ambushes against the sons of Ammon, Moab, and Mount Seir, who had come against Judah, so they were routed. For the sons of Ammon and Moab rose up against the inhabitants of Mount Seir, destroying them completely. And when they had finished with the inhabitants of Seir, they helped to destroy one another. So you see this illustrated a bit in this particular passage, where God comes to Judah and says, do not fight. There's going to be two enemies. There's an enemy that wants to seek your destruction. I would say college campuses are like that. They seek the destruction of our way of life as Christians, as conservatives. They seek that. And do not fear, I'm going to raise up someone else to fight them. And in this case, Ammon, Moab, and Mount Seir had come against Judah, were routed by Ammon and Moab. There was a war of Israel's enemies against each other, and Israel didn't have to even get involved. And that's an advantageous position in a war. That's what the kind of place you want to be in a conflict like that. We see in 2 Chronicles 35:20 through 24. Another example here. After all this, when Josiah had set the temple in order, Necho, king of Egypt, came up to make war at Carchemish on the Euphrates, and Josiah went out to engage him. But Necho sent messengers to him, saying, "What have we to do with each other, O king of Judah? I am not coming against you today, but against the house which I am at war. And God has ordered me to hurry. Stop for your own sake from interfering with God, who is with me, so that he will not destroy you." However, Josiah would not turn away from him, but disguised himself in order to make war with him. Nor did he listen to the words of Necho from the mouth of God, but came to war in the plain of Megiddo. And then he was shot, he died, and that's the end of Josiah. Generally a good king, but then made this foolish decision at the end of his life to violate what Proverbs says here. He took the dog by the ears, and he passed by and he meddled in strife that was not his own. And in this particular instance, this was with the Pharaoh. And so he suffered the consequences for that. You also have in Mark chapter 3, verses 23 through 27, and he called them to himself and began speaking to them in parables. How can Satan cast out Satan? If a kingdom is divided against itself, the kingdom cannot stand. If a house is divided against itself, the house will not be able to stand. If Satan has risen up against himself and is divided, he cannot stand, but he is finished. So here's the principle that I see, and this applies to friend-enemy battles, distinctions. that exist in the real world, when your enemy is divided against himself, he is much weaker. He is much more vulnerable. And if the enemy is going to fight themselves, or enemies both that have your harm in their interest, they decide to harm themselves instead, the wise thing to do is generally to stay out of that. And that's why I suggest that that's probably what conservatives and Christians should do in this particular situation. And it doesn't mean you want violence. It doesn't mean you want death and destruction. No one wants those things. But I so often see conservatives talk about these institutions as our institutions, our colleges. I saw Mike Johnson last night on Sean Hannity saying this. These are our universities. We need them to be safe places for students to learn. And the naivety of that, are students learning some things? I'm sure they are. What's the by and large, though, the product of these universities? They're cranking out woke individuals who hate you, hate your way of life, want it destroyed. These universities aren't our universities. These are, should the police come in? Should the administrators call the police in? Sure. Yeah, the administrators and the Democrats who live in these blue areas where most of these universities are located, New York City being no exception, should handle these matters. Without Congress, this is my opinion, but without Congress, Republicans in Congress stepping up to try to solve the problem in a way that puts them coming down on one side of a leftist faction so that they can hive away some leftists into their camp, and we were so infiltrated already by leftists, and so that they can put an end to the conflict, so they can solve this problem for the Democrats. You want this ideological conflict to continue if you're interested in winning elections. That's my point. And you risk yourself, if you're directly involved, getting hurt in a conflict that is not your own. If you are a student or someone who's on these university campuses and trying to put yourself in harm's way. I noted that it was interesting to me in 2020, and even a little before then, there were so many monuments to Christian men that came down all over the country. Christian men like Robert E. Lee, who is viewed as not just a Southern hero, but an American hero and a Christian hero more broadly. I've done some podcasts on that. He's respected by everyone from Bill Bright to R.C. Sproul to, you name it, of the old guard in evangelicalism, always looked up to him. And yet when his statues came down in various places, and I'm just using him as one example, there were many more, did we see Christians go out anywhere to stand against the mob in the locations where they lived? And I frankly did not. This wasn't something that was done. It wasn't, but and if they did, the news organizations weren't there, like Fox News wasn't there to commend them. By and large, Fox News ignored a lot of this kind of stuff. It wasn't, I'm not saying there was no stories done about it, but it wasn't the celebrations that you're seeing here. There's sort of a celebratory posture that I see with radio conservatives and television conservatives. I'm talking about elite conservatives in powerful settings. They seem to be very, very enthusiastic about Israel, celebrating Israel, and very much celebrating anyone who stands with Israel. It's all bravery to them. But when you would think statues that would mean more to them, that mean more to America. We're talking about a foreign country. Don't forget that. we're talking about, and I realize there's significance biblically. Israel has significance, but we are still talking about a country on the other side of the world, and yet monuments to people who actually did great things in this country, like Columbus, like Thomas Jefferson, and like George Washington, they could hardly be defended, and that's one of the things that bothers me. It's the same thing that I showed you earlier with Greg Abbott, encouraging protests, peaceful protests for George Floyd, and then calling for any student who protests and is anti-Semitic against Israel, apparently, that they should suffer consequences. Why the different posture towards these two things? What is that? Why is there this enthusiasm for a foreign country so beyond the country that we live in and in the heritage that we share? Something's very wrong with that. And especially when you see it on the right, it really confirms to me that America is dying, or maybe it's already dead in some ways. And that's probably the thing that a lot of older, I get in trouble whenever I use the name boomer con, so a little bit, because I have to define it every time, but I don't really know what else to say, to call it. People who especially are in that boomer generation, who grew up during the Cold War, who still have that Cold War mentality, who think of America as this very exceptional place that believes in God, and it stands against communism. It stands for the right things. It's hard for them to let go. And I get it. It's hard to let go of what you knew as a child. And I wonder, though, to what extent that's even still around. If you can't defend your own culture against the mob, you can't defend your own heritage, it is a conflict that belongs to you, and you sidestep it or treat it with kid gloves. And yet, when it's in the interests of a foreign country, you crank it up to level 10 and you're very enraged and you're fighting and what is that? That means your allegiance is, there's a problem there. There's a problem there with the Order Amaris. All right. Well, Jeff Prado made the same point that I was making. Satan House is divided, and it's not our job to fix it. Never interrupt your enemy when he's making a mistake, says Gabriel H. Chekhov says, the difference in posture is the perceived cultural presence, I'd guess. Yeah, and I'm guessing by that what you mean is the capital that you get. You can peel off maybe some leftists to support you if you take a very pro-Israel stance against these protesters, and you're tough on them. But that wasn't the same in 2020. The left was united in 2020 against symbols of our own heritage. They're not united right now. That is a big difference. Betty says, if the wolves say it, folks will disagree just because of Christian nationalism. You've noticed that too, huh? Mr. Perry says, I will say the patriotic students in Arizona who protected the flag were doing the right thing, but I agree, Hamilton. Yes, and I should have showed that video. I didn't have it right with me. I did see that right before the podcast, that there were some students on an Arizona campus who were protecting the American flag. And that did make a little more sense to me. But yes. AS826F says, John, the agitators group were calling for a global intifada from the river to the sea. All Zionists should be killed, etc. I'll say it's both Israel and Jews. Yeah, I mean, I know I've heard this kind of thing on the radio and stuff, and I'm sure one of the issues with this is you have a big set of protests surrounding the whole country. So different things are being said in different places. I don't know to what extent that is pervasive, but to the extent it is, and I'm sure it is happening, this is still a anti-Israel thing. Even those chants, these are anti-Israel more than anything else. And it wouldn't make sense for Jewish people to be engaged in these things if that weren't the case, in my opinion. And I should just say, again, I think I've already said it, but I'm not saying that there aren't people who are against Jewish folks. I'm not saying they're anti-Jewish folks in these audiences. There are. I'm sure there probably are. But the stated reason for being there, the overwhelming majority of the people who are there, what they say when they're interviewed on camera, if they have anything to say, if they know why they're there, it's because of Israel, and it's the conflict with Palestine. So one has to wonder, says Draskalkis. One has to wonder why the institutes that train these activists bites back when they protest the wrong thing, almost as if they are openly supporting our enemies. All right, well, I think that's mostly what I wanted to say. I was possibly thinking of having, and since he hasn't showed up yet, I don't think he's coming, but having Andrew Isker on the podcast. He was a possibility that he might drop by to comment on some things that were happening on Twitter. There's two, though, I commented on. I think these were tweets that he wanted to comment on, and I was in the thread in two of them, so I'll just comment them on very briefly. But there was something Toby Sumpter said. He said, remember, anti-white rhetoric is actually anti-Christian. Don't take the bait. If white people are Marxists, they are allies. If you're a black Christian, you've been colonized. The conflict is not about skin color. It's about religion and culture. That's why they also hate Jews. And a number of people jumped on this to basically say that's not true. Joel Webbin was one of them. And then Toby Sumpter responded to Joel and says, and this is where I jumped in. He said, please note, I'm talking about why the woke left hate Jews. And I do think it's because there's a whiff of Christ in their Torah observance, despite serious perversions, enemies as regards the gospel, but beloved for the sake of the patriarchs. They smell that. So the argument here is that this isn't really about race. This whole thing is about religion. It's a religious conflict. And there is an element of religion here, but what I responded and I said is, living near high concentrations of Jewish people, which I do. There are some towns that are overwhelmingly Jewish that aren't far from me, and I've done a lot of work there in the past, doing repair work and so forth when I used to do that. I just said I can safely say that the reason some people oppose them here has nothing to do with Christianity, and I'm sure of that. They don't think that they're somehow, they really hate Christianity, and those Jewish people remind them of Christianity. That's not what's happening at all. And I said, and the people most concerned with anti-Semitism tend to blame Christians for the Holocaust. And by the way, that is across the board, and that is part and parcel to Holocaust studies. In fact, if you go to the Holocaust Museum in DC, which I would recommend, but in the beginning of the museum, that is one of the arguments that's made, is this is the anti-Semitism of Christianity that eventually caused this. And now the theory is, well, it could have happened anywhere, really, in Europe. Anywhere that was Christian in Europe. It just happened to happen in Germany first, but it would have happened somewhere else had it not happened in Germany. I was essentially taught this stuff when I was I took a Holocaust class on the graduate level. So that's the pervasive thinking. That's what leftists think of this. So I think Toby is way off on this one. And why he would say something like that, I'm not exactly sure, but I do know that on the right, there is a need to try to minimize race, just because the classical liberals, at least on the right, agree with critical race theorists that race is a social construct. And because of that, they don't think that conflicts are really over racial differences. And if you look at the history of humanity, though, that is one component to many conflicts, is racial differences. And it's not just skin color. I know that's the next thing that's often said, which I think Toby said as well. It's like, well, it's silly to fight over skin. It's not. Race isn't skin color, though. Race is a lot more holistic than that. In fact, I think if you went back a few hundred years, if you were talking about race, if you're talking about ethnicity, if you're talking about people, if you're talking about nationality, you would be talking about the same thing. There wouldn't really be a great deal of differences between those things. We've separated them out now because of a number of things, a number of developments, including Darwin's theories. But that's essentially what race has meant is a more holistic understanding. It's a people that have a lineage that goes back. They have there's intermarriage between themselves, so that they can say that they're one people in that way. They live in usually a certain region of land that they can call their own. There's a sense of belonging. Usually there's a religion attached to it as well. There's a number of things there. I suppose evolutionists have reduced this to the biological component alone, but even that's not just skin color. So I do disagree with Toby on that particular point, and I don't. It's a weird take. So let's see if I wanted to talk about that anymore. Not really. Yeah. And so I found the comment where he talks about skin color. So anyway, nothing really more I wanted to say about that. I only had it queued up because I thought maybe Andrew Isker was joining the podcast, and he's not. So, or he hasn't yet, at least. So I'll take some comments and then we'll get into the Arizona stuff. Betty says, wow, they are changing history, aren't they? Hitler pretended to be a Christian for a time, but was just using religion. Hitler's, you have different versions of Hitler, that just like you have different versions of Abraham Lincoln and different versions of many historical figures that are studied often. And people will find threads and find quotes, and they'll follow them and they'll categorize them, and they'll make. So the thing about Hitler is, yes, he was very involved in occult practices, or at least he was very interested in those things. And some people have tried to make out that that's all Hitler was interested in. Hitler did have a use for Christianity insofar as not true Orthodox Christianity, but Christianity that could be commandeered or influenced by the state and the Nazi Party. So in that sense, yes, he would say things that today atheists love to latch onto, to say Hitler was a Christian because, look, he viewed Martin Luther as a hero to the German people. Of course he did. And he had to. It's like today. I was going to say today, if you saw George Washington as a hero to the Americans, but I probably can't use him anymore. Now it'll be like Martin Luther King, I suppose. He's a symbol that can be used. And so that's what I think Hitler was doing there. But no, Hitler was not an Orthodox Christian. And I think there's enough evidence to say he wasn't enthusiastic about Christianity. It was just something that he thought he could use, possibly. And if he couldn't use it, he didn't want it. So let's see here. Other comments, questions. I know there's a lot of stuff coming in. The 21st century conservative intelligentsia is not especially marked by courage. And I would say that's true, which is one reason I think when you see something like Rory Wilson and his friend, and I forgive me, I can't remember the name of his friend, but when they were standing there, I think that is one of the things you say, you look at that and you say, yeah, finally someone's standing up, especially after 2020, the optics of that, right? Seeing so many monuments come down and so many buildings get destroyed with no one standing up. And to say, hey, there's some kids that are brave now. They're going to stand up. I think our hearts are yearning for that. And we want to see some bravery out there. Of course, bravery is great, but we want to just think through the causes, or is this cause worthy? Is this a risk worth taking? And then when you answer that question, then as Davy Crockett said, be sure you're right, and then go ahead. All right, well, let's get into the abortion stuff. I wanted to talk about that. I'm not going to take as long on this, but I wanted to share with you. Did I want to read this? I want to read this first. I want to read this. And you know what? I should really probably, before I even start, I should just make sure that the law, I think it was supposed to be passed today. I think the vote was today. Let me just see if there's a verdict yet. Okay, yes, 49 minutes ago. So I have not read this yet. We're going to read it together, and then I'll comment on it. So Arizona Senate passes repeal of 1864 abortion ban. The Arizona Senate passed a repeal of the state's near total ban on abortion on Wednesday, capping a week-long legislative scramble to respond to the state's Supreme Court bombshell ruling that upheld the law from 1864. The bill, which the state House approved last week, will soon head to Democratic Governor Katie Hobbs. She is expected to sign it. Two state Senate Republicans, Shauna Bullock and T.J. Shope, they should probably be famous, Shauna Bullock and T.J. Shope, joined 14 Democrats in a narrowly divided chamber in approving a repeal of the Civil War era law. So these people need to be primaried. Frankly, you have two two pro-abortion. I'll just say that Republicans in the Senate in Arizona there. And Bullock, in a lengthy and nuanced speech ahead of casting her pivotal vote, told several emotional stories of women who experienced major complications during pregnancy and needed care that would likely be restricted under the 1864 law. That's interesting, since the 1864 law, and I'm going to show it to you. Let's just read it. A person who provides, supplies, or administers to a pregnant woman or procures such woman to take any medicine, drugs, or substance, or uses or employs any instrument or other means whatever, with intent thereby to procure the miscarriage of such a woman, unless it is necessary to save her life, shall be punished by imprisonment in the state prison for not less than 2 years, nor more than 5 years. So this has an exception for the life of the mother. And it doesn't even punish the woman, it just punishes the abortionist. The abortionist is punished if they induce a miscarriage, and it's not for the purpose of saving the life of the mother. So there you have it. Now, before this went out, I wanted to, I don't know if I want to read this whole thing. This is from an abolitionist group on Twitter or X. I keep saying Twitter. Abolitionists Rising. And this is what they said. Today, the Senate of Arizona is debating whether to repeal a law that punishes an abortionist 2 to 5 years for committing murder. This is 3 years after they repealed a law that punished the mother 1 to 5 years. Should Christians advocate that we keep the existing law? Which, of course, they did not. While many rightly believe that incrementalism is ineffective and a delaying mechanism, it seems few understand that advocating for partial laws is wrong altogether. They reason it is better than not having any law, or a worse law on abortion. There is only one just approach to the laws about abortion. It must be treated equally to other murder charges. Protection can not only be equal, but justice must be equal as well. God is not pleased with a law that gives 2 to 5 years of prison time only for abortionists. He demands justice. And so it keeps going, and it talks about, let's see, that this, we've had a pragmatic approach that doesn't align to Scripture. This law in Arizona should be repealed. So So this is an abolitionist group, and I understand there are different abolitionist groups out there, which I get. This is just the one that I happen to see. But this particular group, which I believe is based in Oklahoma, believes that just along with those two Republicans, who I just said should be primaried, they would agree, at least in this one point, that the law should be repealed, that the law I just read for you that restricts abortion. And the reason is because it's not equal protection. But they believe that it should be replaced with a bill to abolish abortion altogether. Okay, so that's where they would differ with those two Republicans. As a practical point, what will succeed in this matter? What does success in this matter mean? Pills will still flow into Arizona as they already are, but the Christians of the state will revel in a false victory, one that saves no preborn children. Many will grow cold thinking the battle has been won, which has already happened in many states. We must not be the means of falsehood Satan uses to deceive the church. Victory will mean defeat for the preborn. All right, so it goes on and it talks about how essentially that, well, I suppose there's no winning solution here. This is, in the minds of some abortion abolitionists, and I'll explain what I think that means in a moment for those who don't know. For them, the vote that happened today would have been bad either way, because there wasn't an abolition law that would abolish abortion completely to follow it up with. So it would just be a lose-lose. And, this is a mentality that I am, I suppose, somewhat concerned about. Now, the reason I'm concerned is because I think that law should have not been repealed. If you don't have another law waiting, an abolition law, then what you've just done is you've opened the floodgates and there's going to be children dying. There's less children dying under this 1864 law, right? And so it should stay in place until you have something better to replace it with, which this is where we all agree. And this would be everyone who's truly anti-abortion in all its forms and consistent about it would agree that the only just, fully just endpoint goal, telos, of any movement to end abortion would be the total elimination of any loopholes in the law that would allow for abortion. I think that would be that would be the consistent thing that everyone would agree on. Where the disagreement comes is a matter of strategy. And so, is it a good strategy to take out a protection that is there, that's not perfect, that allows some exceptions, and with nothing to replace it? I would say no. I would say that's a bad thing, actually. And you do have to, unfortunately, look at, this is just a reality of politics, you do have to analyze political will. You can keep trying to move that Overton window, which you should do. And this is where the Democrats have been really good. What do they do after they gain a victory? Every time they gain a victory, they say, we have so much farther to go. Every time. It's never enough. They never can reach the end point. They have so much farther to go. So they push, and they get to that rising tide. The wave comes in as far as it possibly can go. And then they tap in right there, and they put their flag, and they then use that for the next time that they have momentum to push farther. And this is something that I think Republicans have been overall unwilling to do. They don't think in those terms. They think in terms of, on this issue especially, there's, I think, an ideological component that perhaps sets us back from implementing winning strategies on this, because you have some people thinking if it's not perfect, it should just be you can't use it for momentum. You can't use it to push the needle. So any heartbeat bill would be in this category. Really, anything that doesn't completely limit abortion, just partially limits it, is in this particular category. And then you have a group of people that are just super. I think they're kind of ideological too. You have another group that is obsessed with poll numbers and what people think and what's going to win them elections, and where the majority is, what kind of exceptions that they want, what will appeal to the most people who are alive and vote. And so they end up not pushing the needle at all. They're content for the needle. They're content to just sit on the boat, and as the tide rises or sinks, they're just going to sit on their boat. So they're not trying to push the tide. They're not trying to to get any farther inland. They're content to just be there. And those are the kind of people that you have to pull. They'll abolish abortion if it suits their fancy, right? So they're very ideological is not the word for them. They're opportunistic. They're actually very unprincipled people. So you have ideologues on these extremes, and then you have unprincipled people, and then you have a bunch of us, and I would consider myself, I guess, somewhere, I don't know if in between's the word, but I'm not really on either of those camps completely. I have the same goal of upholding God's law on this, but the vote today is an evil vote. The vote that passed to abolish this law, to ensure that Arizonians can have greater access to abortion, that was evil. That was wrong. That was in the wrong direction. And so that's how I'm looking at it, is direction. And unfortunately, in politics, with the system that we have, without a dictator or a king or someone who can just create an edict, that's what you have to do. You're in the business of electoral politics. So I did see a number of people, though, who are abolitionists who were very much in support of this law. And so I asked on X why that was. And so some people were going back and forth. And I realized quickly that abolitionists were people who call themselves abortion abolitionists are split on this. Now, I said I would explain what that was. My understanding is the difference between abolitionists and they often like to contrast themselves with the pro-life industry. But I think, or the pro-life movement, I think you have the pro-life movement, you have the elites in the pro-life movement. That's like Big Eva, to be honest with you. It's like, that's kind of like what it is, right? Would you say that there's just our group and then there's Big Eva in evangelicalism? No, you'd say there's a whole bunch of people that are sort of caught in the middle, that they're not Big Eva, but they're the Big Eva's logical consumer, I suppose. So you have a number of people that span the gamut on anti-abortion. The abolitionists would set themselves up as the anti-pro-life, in a way that the pro-life movement is very compromised. The pro-life movement doesn't want to punish women who seek to obtain abortions. They think that's unjust. The abolitionists say, no, God's law says you're punished for murder. I would agree with them completely on that. They would say that incrementalism is wrong for the most part, although that's why there are some abolitionists who think that certain kinds of incrementalism are okay or acceptable, but abolitionists, by and large, that's what they would characterize them. They're against incrementalism. So a heartbeat bill, no can do. Anything that limits it but still allows it in certain forms is sinful, because they frame it like you're voting for a law in that case that promotes abortion in certain times. Even though most heartbeat bills are written that it restricts abortion, they're looking at what it leaves out. So they look at it as a promotion of promoting abortion. That's how they think on this, at least the ones I've interacted with. And this is coming up after the weekend when we had at the conference a little Q&A on this. And I learned some things I did not know, because I gave basically the argument I just gave. And someone came up to me. I don't know. He hasn't given me permission to say who it is. So I'm going to leave him out of it. But someone told me that actually a lot of these heartbeat bills were trigger laws. They only went into effect when Roe v. Wade was overturned. And so in a sense, some of them, and I don't know to what extent, actually did open loopholes for abortions to take place that would not have been opened otherwise. And if they didn't have a law, that the murder laws would have kicked in, logically, I suppose. And so I don't know all the ins and outs of the legal structure there, but in that case, it would be wrong, I think, to vote for a heartbeat bill if it's moving the needle in the other direction. So that's how I look at it. Is we need to be strategic and push as far and as often as we can to secure an end to abortion. And that's why I think what happened in Arizona today is a tragedy, because this was momentum to build on, not something to destroy. And in the context, destroying this bill, even though some abolitionists, I guess, think that's, this bill needed to go down, what in effect is happening is it's going down in a context in which there's going to be much looser abortion legislation. And so that's kind of a problem. So I don't really have much more to say other than that. Some of this I'm just thinking out loud for, but I will take questions or comments or interaction, and I would be happy to do that. Still waiting for your review of the Civil War movie. It's funny. My brother and a friend told me it was awful, simply awful. Don't see it. It was stereotypical. It got conservatives wrong. It was a leftist pipe dream, all that. And And then when I was at the conference, and someone came up to me who said, "It was great. I saw it twice and you need to go see it." So now I'm not sure what to think. If there is no God above the state becomes God, the highest authority in our lives of those governed. Yeah, that's very true. That's why we have to hold on to whatever Christian character does exist. Abolitionist. We have someone, I don't know if he represents all abortion abolitionists. He says upholding God's law is not a goal, it's a standard, and we must repent towards God's law. Well, it can be both a goal and a standard. I mean, those things aren't mutually exclusive, I would say. You think of an issue like pornography, and you're trying to limit pornography, right? God has a law on this. It's evil. It's wrong. But I wouldn't say that, unless there's, I won't vote for any bill restricting it because I'm waiting for that perfect bill that's going to totally outlaw it. I want that bill, but in the meantime, if there's a bill that shields my kids from seeing it, I'll vote for it. If there's a referendum that restricts internet providers from, I think in some states have this now, that minors can't actually, they're limited from seeing going to certain websites. There's filters. I don't know exactly how it works. I would totally vote for that. I wouldn't just, let's see here. Incrementalism is sin. Well, show me the scripture that says that. That's part of the problem. And heartbeat laws aren't written as if it's restricting. It's written with exceptions. Yeah, there's different heartbeat bills, though. I'm saying the ones that I've seen. I haven't read all of them. So yes, it is possible that I'm sure there are many that probably do have that. Usually the intent, though, from what I understand, and this is, maybe I'm being theoretical here because I don't have an actual bill that I'm looking at that I'm critiquing, but just go with me on this. If there is a bill that is written, someone said on Twitter the other day, or X rather, what if there was a bill that said it's illegal to murder on Tuesday through or Wednesday through the weekend? Half the week you cannot murder. And it doesn't address the other half of the week. It just says it restricts half the week. You can't murder. And it's in a context, this is being introduced, where the whole week you can murder. Would you vote for it? And I said, well, the way you frame it makes a big difference. If you're putting a bill in place that makes murder legal for half the week, and they'll say that's the effect of it. But I'm saying, well, actually, that may be the effect of it. But the framing of it does matter. If you're putting something in place that makes murder legal for half the week in a context where murder is legal the whole week, then no, you're voting to make murder legal. If you're voting for something that makes murder illegal half the week in a context where murder is legal the whole week, then I would say I think you're well within your principles as a Christian to vote for something like that, so long as you realize the God's law and the goal that you ultimately have. So you're implementing that as a political strategy with the ultimate goal being, let's make it illegal the whole week. Thanks, John, for interacting. Yeah, I appreciate you too. I don't know who you are, but and look, I appreciate. I get it. Like I get it. I realize too. I'm not going through some of the situations y'all are in some of these red states where you are fed up. You've had Republican majorities for years. You've had Republican governors. They all say they're pro-life and they don't do anything. And you're just as mad as a hornet and you don't want to compromise. And to be honest with you, in some of those red states, that may be the right move. That may be the best move strategically to get your message out. I live in a blue state right now. And, before that, I lived in kind of purplish states. I lived in North Carolina. I lived in Virginia. I lived in California for a year. I never saw this. There was never a hope of having that level of control as people do in places like Idaho and Oklahoma. Okay, so for an individual that makes, T. James Moon says, for an individual that makes sense for multiple legislatures and a legislator, 10% repentant, 45% pro-life squishes, 45% abortion commies, take what you can get. Yeah, I get the frustration. Someone asked if E. Michael Jones will be a guest. I don't know. I'm not very familiar with, I mean, people have mentioned E. Michael Jones to me, but I'm not very familiar with his work. So, all right. I'll take a few more questions, but then I got to go. If you think red states are bad, imagine being in Canada where your conservative party is another shade of liberal. Pray for us. Yeah. In Canada, it's just like being in New York in this way. Like we used to have in New York a pro-life party. Doesn't exist anymore. They can't find the people to be in it. I am a registered conservative. I'm not even a Republican. I'm in the New York Conservative Party. And and they are still, I mean, the Republicans have pretty much punted on this issue in New York. The conservatives are still pro-life, but they have no power. And so in New York, to be like, if you're in the state legislature and you have the opportunity, let's say to restrict Planned Parenthood, we're going to take some of the funding away. Or I don't even know if that opportunity would come up. I'm trying to think strategically, like when the last time they were able to even restrict abortion. But if you have some small thing you can do to chip away at it, that's all you can do. And you hope you save a few babies. But on the legal level, there's no way. Like if you just don't vote for any of those things, then you're like, because you're waiting for the bill that is perfectly reflects God's law. I'm just telling you, it doesn't come along unless there's a full repentance and an understanding of the wickedness and evil and sin, which is why evangelism and discipleship are also important parts of this process in a way, or at least, and I don't view them as means to a political end, but they just happen to be they have political ramifications. So I think that unfortunately the deck is stacked against you in situations like that. It's sad. It really is sad. And so I think that might be, someone told me in our Q&A, because I was disagreeing with the pastor, I guess, a little bit on this. And they said, hey, the difference was, because I said, well, you're still talking about Idaho, I'm talking about New York. And he said, yeah, that's an abolitionist guy came up to me. He's like, yeah, that makes total sense what you're saying, given kind of where you're coming from. And so anyway, sad day. And I was praying for, about that Arizona situation. It's just sad to me. I don't know what to say. Like, their babies are going to die. Do Republicans have blood on their hands? Yeah, those two certainly do. They had an opportunity to prevent more babies from dying, and they chose to be pro-abortion Republicans. And, did Donald Trump have a hand in this? I don't know if he did directly, but certainly his rhetoric hasn't helped lately on this. So would you advise general incrementalism for someone in Canada, or would it be better to dig in your heels and let the Conservative Party know that you aren't going to put up with them anymore? This is a strategic question, by the way. And I think it's important to note that. In 2016, I had a similar dilemma with Donald Trump. I didn't vote for him even in the general. Now I'm in New York. It doesn't make as big of a difference, but I campaigned for Cruz at that time. Now I'm looking back wondering why I did that. But at the time, it seemed like the right thing. And, Donald Trump, he seemed like he was going to be pro-choice to me. I know he made that statement about punishing mothers for abortion, but I just figured he was a liberal New Yorker. I just didn't really believe him. He was pro homosexuality to an extent. He was not good on taxes. I mean, he was a Hillary supporter, if I'm not mistaken, back in like 2008. So anyway, to purify the party, I advocated that people don't vote for Donald Trump, because I figured the damage to the conservative movement, the Republican Party, was more profitable to let us lose an election and then come in stronger with a conservative candidate than it was to win with someone who was going to push the party left. That's what I thought. I think given what I knew, it made sense. And some of what I thought has actually come to fruition. But I don't know if Donald Trump, I don't think that that's because of Donald Trump as much as it is just the way that the culture has changed so quickly. So I think a little differently about it, but I think that was a strategic move, and many people made it. I wasn't the only one. It's funny, on the panel on Saturday at this conference, we had 3 people, myself included, who all said they were voting for Trump this year. And all 3 of us said we did not vote for him in 2016, even in the general. And I think a lot of that was we wanted to hold the Republican Party accountable. So the same question applies to Canada. Do you want to hold the Conservative Party in Canada accountable? You have to make a prudential judgment on that. What elections can you afford to lose? And will the party, will they get the message that the reason they lost was because their base disagrees with their message, disagrees with their platform? So I don't know enough about Canadian politics to know when that's prudent and when it's not. My gut is that if it's anything like the United States, you are pretty stuck. Local elections generally in the United States, you can afford to lose them more often than not to purify the party. On national elections, with the stakes so high now, for example, in the United States, I think the big issue, I know that the it depends on the state you're in, but the Democrats really want to make abortion the issue. They think it's winning issue. I think for the Republicans, though, it's the border thing. And the reason I think that's such a big issue is because in the next 4 years, you can say bye to any anti-abortion legislation if you have permanent majorities that are imported here from the third world to vote Democrat. You see how serious that is? I mean, that affects the life issue. It affects all the other issues. And so I think that is the huge issue going into this year. I can't afford really, and this is my prudential judgment, I can't afford not to try to do everything I can to make sure Trump is elected again, because I know he'll end that. He'll at least buy us some time on that. But it's a dismal situation in so many ways, and I don't mean to blackpill you at the end of the podcast here. It's a prudential question, though. That's what it is. This is not a rigid ideological question as much as it is what situation are we in and what can we do? What are the options available to us? I don't have options not available to me to choose from, which is so often the case. I asked a guy, kind of a hardcore abolitionist guy, and I enjoyed talking to him at the conference. We were having lunch, because I was like, I don't really feel like I have an option. I only have the options available to me, and I don't want the perfect to be the enemy of the good. So I think I'm going to have to vote for Donald Trump, right? And he disagreed with that, and I said, well, like, what do you do then? And his answer seemed to be, look, you make your voice heard, you pray, but you don't withdraw, you don't vote in the general election. Then I guess that's the conclusion that I got from him, at least. And I don't see that as an option because I have kids coming. I'm looking at the world they're going to inherit, and I can't look them in the eyes and say, I didn't do what I could to make this place as good as I possibly could for you, because I didn't have the perfect option. I didn't have an option that I didn't have someone that was qualified completely to be in hold this office. I mean, at this point, it's like I want someone to stop the border issue, so to stop the people from flooding over the border that aren't vetted, that are some of them are criminals. There's economic problems. There are all kinds of things attached to this, but permanent Democrat majorities being the main one. Someone has to stop that. So that's one issue of many, but that's kind of the way I look at it. And it's not a complete parallel. The thought just came to my head, though. The perfect enemy of the good. I think of even like the way the Pharisees, and I'm not saying everyone who disagrees with me is a Pharisee at all, but I just think of the story of when Jesus and the apostles on the Sabbath were, the Pharisees got onto them because they picked wheat. And Jesus gives the example of David taking the showbread in the temple, even though it wasn't reserved for him, because he says the law was, the Sabbath was made for man, not man for the Sabbath. And he gives a general principle there. And I think that, you have God's law, which is unchanging. You also have situations where it's worked out in the real world. And you see this even in Israel. You see they have regulations on slavery, regulations on polygamy, right? Today in the Western world, we've totally regulated polygamy. Now, you could say practically speaking, maybe that's not true, but as far as marriage is concerned, we've developed in our common law a greater restriction on that. We have with slavery as well. And I'm prepared to say that those are good developments. Those are positive developments suited to our situation, suited to the world that we live in. And so I think there is a suitability factor, and Jesus was getting at that there's a suitability factor in what the apostles were doing, picking bread on the Sabbath. And, it's, and of course, you have to look at the reasons that you have these laws for the showbread, the reasons for the Sabbath and that kind of thing. They were in keeping with the principles of God's law, but the outworking applied to the situation, they were in a different situation. And so it wasn't a problem for them to not essentially keep perfectly the laws that were suited towards for a situation where, and I'm getting out on a limb here, I probably should look up the passage, but suited for a situation in which they're traveling and they're hungry on the Sabbath and they are about the Lord's work and so forth. So that's, what I think of when I think of like, what situation am I in? How can I uphold God's law, his perfect law? And how can I be in this situation as guiltless as I possibly, well, guiltless. I want to be guiltless. I don't want to violate. I don't want to sin at all, right? But if I'm in the position of being a legislator or someone who's voting, which I will be here soon, and we all will be in November, we have that option to us. How do I bring about the best outcome? How do I honor God to the full extent I possibly can in the situatedness, in the position He's put me in, which isn't the perfect situation, which isn't the perfect world. And that's where I guess I'm looking at, well, I guess it's probably going to be Trump. Well, it's been an hour and 20 minutes. And at this point, I'm just taking comments in. It's a Q&A time. We do have Happy Heart, though, in the channel. And Happy Heart, if you take your microphone, if you unmute yourself, I'll definitely have you enter. Let me just take maybe another comment from the chat here. Rocket Man asks, is it ethical to double the impact of your protest by voting against the conservatives? So like make it crash sooner? Yeah, that's a theory that I don't trust. The theory is that if everything goes south and the left, goes south completely, then we can rise from the ashes. I don't buy that, actually, because we've been saying that for years and it just keeps going. And people keep getting indoctrinated. I don't think that's necessarily. I just disagree. I understand the strategy. I just don't think that that's going to be necessarily the outcome. All right, Happy Heart, we have with us. Hey, how you doing?
I'm good.
You're a Happy Heart. I don't know who this is exactly, but I'm assuming you're one of the patrons. So I'll just say thank you up front.
You're welcome. I didn't intend to get on. I'm sorry. I was just listening in, but you have some excellent points and super helpful as we think about how to traverse this time. So I appreciate all you're saying. It's very helpful.
Oh, well, thank you. Okay, so you didn't really have a comment. You were just listening in.
Yes.
Okay. All right. I'll let you go then. Thank you so much. That's
right.
very kind of you, and I appreciate your support. All right. Well, we'll probably end the podcast here. I know people are now debating. You can keep debating, by the way, in the comments section after the podcast ends. These are things worth discussing, and that's why I want to talk about them. I'm open to changing my mind on things, but it's like Luther said, scripture and reason. I kind of need those things to be able to do that, and that's why I enjoy taking comments. Tomorrow morning. It's tomorrow morning. Yes, it's tomorrow morning. I believe at 10 a.m. Look at my calendar. There is a podcast. I know I'm doing these close together, but I'm doing another podcast with CJ Angle. I think it's 10 a.m. tomorrow. And we are going to be talking about woke right, or right-wing woke. You've heard this term perhaps if you're on social media, but people saying that there's these new conservatives who are basically woke, but they're on the right. And we want to explain that to you. What's being talked about here? Who are the woke right people? And why are they being accused of this? It's going to be a unique take that you likely won't get in maybe hardly any other places in evangelical podcast land, but it's going to be helpful. So CJ Angle and myself tomorrow, 10 a.m. Don't miss it. God bless. Hope you have a wonderful evening.